Hey, what up, guys? This is an exclusive group interview with John Hight and Brian Birmingham on WoW TBC Classic.
Yeah, the thing is, this is audio basically, so you're gonna see some footage, from Burning Crusade and all of that. We'll also have the questions placed in text in case you do want to watch it. But mostly, you can just put this video on and listen to it in the background and get some juicy insights from TBC Classic. Enjoy! Should we wait with bated breath and expect the Lich King to return in a couple of years? And how long will the second round last? Until what update you plan to continue?
Oh, I see right off the bat with that question.
Obviously, I think give us a chance to get Burning Crusade out.
Yeah.
So we aren't making any commitments as to what will happen after Burning Crusade. We are going to pay a lot of attention to the community and what they want. Obviously, the reception we've had for Classic has just been fantastic, and we're super happy with the how robust that community's been. And we understand we have an obligation to keep you entertained. So first, let's get Burning Crusade out. Hopefully, you all enjoy it, and then stay tuned.
I also want to clarify on the how long will it be out. Of course, there's plenty of content in Burning Crusade to sustain us. So we have a spacing out of the content like we did for Classic launch. We're going to divide it into phases, and that's actually a departure from the way that Burning Crusade originally launched. But we think it's the right decision here because we feel like there's a moment when a new piece of content becomes available and everybody kind of comes together and can be in a social environment to play with each other as they tackle that content. And spacing them out allows people who are up at the beginning and getting into the stuff as its first release, a chance to wait for their friends to catch up to them so they can all play together as the people who are progressing through the content at a more measured pace are able to level up and get in there. I know that's been beneficial to me. I tend to level slowly and then raid obsessively, and so it's always nice when my friends who have tackled the very first raids while I was still leveling are still coming into the second raids with me as I reach max level.
My question is pretty simple. Any hopes for a new class?
Oh, I think the intention, of course, is to be as authentic as possible. And so with Burning Crusade, we did introduce 2 new races. In a sense, I guess you could say that each faction got a new class, and that Alliance, of course, get Shaman and Horde get Paladins. But of course, those classes already existed. We're just leveling the playing field. That's one of the kind of important things that we think is interesting about Burning Crusade is it's the expansion that said, hey, let's make the factions equal and give them equal access to all the abilities.
All right.
Cool.
The first question that we have in regards to how Classic also released, when it comes to the Burning Crusade, can we expect any realm queues, or are there any measures being taken from the experience of a Classic to prevent those 10 hours, 14 hours queues getting into the servers?
Well, we certainly want that initial experience to be great for everybody, and we are using our modern server technology. So we can handle more people in a realm, and then if necessary, we can also deploy our layering technology, which we would do sparingly, and we may do that at launch time if we have a lot of people hitting at once, which is likely to happen. But we then turn the layers off, as everyone starts to spread out throughout the world.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, is we want to make sure we use that to try to avoid queues as much as possible. Certainly, it's still a possibility if really everybody decides to play on the same realm, and that's a social problem that hopefully players can solve for themselves. We know that players like to play on popular realms, but of course, there is a hardware limit and that we run into when we get into these things. So we're going to deploy all of the technology that we have to try to minimize the risk of that, but there's always some risk. Hopefully it won't be 14 hours. That sounds ridiculous. I don't think we'll have any that bad.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. So with the deletion of layers on the most populated servers, the resource rarity becomes an issue, and some players are tempted to get gold in ways that break the toss to be able to acquire them. So is it something that you think is an issue, and how should it be fixed if it is?
I'm glad you asked that. It's what we really do is when we introduce layers, especially the first time, we didn't have any restrictions between how quickly you could switch between them, and that was really irritating. But we quickly fixed that problem because we knew that we were going to have layers for a little while. And so right now, there's a system in place where if you change layers frequently, it keeps track of how often you've been doing it and rapidly starts increasing the delay between when you can do it. And so it pretty quickly gets up to like multiple minutes and even I think up to an hour where you can get if you're still trying to abuse it on the multi-minute cooldown. It'll really ramp up how quickly you can change layers, because we don't want people primarily doing that irritating behavior of like asking for a layer hop all the time, like just asking for an invite just so they can change layers. Nobody liked that. That was probably the worst thing. In terms of like the impact on the economy, the thing with layers is they scale up based on the population. And so it is still a reasonable rate of like resource gathering nodes for the population that exists. And so if we have so many people playing all at once that we have to spin up a second layer or a third layer, then that will obviously mean that there are more resources, but still like the per capita like resource rate is still reasonable. And we've seen that the opposite problem is really the case, that there's so many players that the resource nodes are heavily contested, and players are sometimes complaining like, I can't find anything to go collect. And we want to try to address those too. Like we were willing to make a small change to Black Lotus when that was really heavily farmed and kind of camped by people who really knew where the one spawn per zone was. And we want to make really targeted adjustments to things that we see are problems because of how many players are playing, rather than kind of making sweeping changes to the game. We really want to start from a sense of authenticity and fix problems as they come up.
Humbled to be talking with you. TBC is probably the most loved expansion by fans. Most see it as the golden era of WoW. Many of us started playing a bit later. How do you think the experience is going to be for players that started with WoW a bit later and couldn't live this expansion when it first came out? Also, in the future, will we be able to keep playing TBC if we don't wish to advance to the next expansion as announced with Classic?
So it sounds like the question is primarily like people who started with it later and how will they experience this content. And I think it is really exciting to be able to go back and see those chapters that maybe you missed, right? There was a really cool like attunement quest chain that you had to go through to get into the raids. And so like when that's the current content and you get to experience that as like, oh man, how am I going to get into Karazhan? I don't know what to do to get the door open. And, you know, Khadgar's telling you about this key that he has and it's broken. And you have to like go on this epic journey to all these exciting dungeons, trying to put the pieces together, culminating in this like travel back in time to meet Medivh in person and try to get him when he's opening the dark portal. Like that's a great journey. And when you have that sense of like, of wanting to do that in order to accomplish a goal that is current and relevant, it's so much more impactful than when you're like leveling past it on the way to the max level content at the time. So for people who missed Burning Crusade, the chance to have this be the current content is going to be really exciting for them, I think.
Yeah, I think this is probably a good point to bring out in case you missed. We are going to provide an optional boost. So we recognize that a lot of people, this was their first experience with World of Warcraft. And they're going to want to come in, they're going to want to play with their friends or maybe folks that started in Classic, so that they don't feel like they're behind. They'll be able to boost this, one character per WoW account to level 58. And they won't necessarily have the same, high level gear that people that played Classic and Rated had, but they'll be able to survive in Hellfire Peninsula. And, had we had a boost back in the day, I think that's something we would have provided just so that, everybody can join in and you don't have to start all the way back in the Barrens again, and spend a month there before you can get into the party in Hellfire.
I don't know, but why would you want to skip the Barrens?
You can still do that, and if you do want to play a Blood Elf or a Draenei, those can't be boosted initially, but they will be available during the pre-patch. So you can always do that, Brian. You know that. You can start as level 1 there.
I know, actually, my wife's been saying she's excited to try Draenei this time, so it should be fun. We've been a Horde for a long time, but the Draenei we've always thought looked really, really pretty. They're a great race, and we're excited to see them coming in.
Hey guys, I'm so happy and hyped. You surprised me, really. I was sure that you would never implement changes like all seals for all pallies, pre-nerf bosses, and I was afraid that we'll have all the tier 4 and tier 5 content right from the beginning. So thumbs up. I'm super happy with the decisions so far. I'm a guild too. What about features like the faction-based quests and rewards, the epic headpieces from engineers, the epic flight form quest line, which all came with patch 2.1, the introduction of expertise in patch 2.3 with all the associated changes for talents and so on, the guild bank class balancing changes for the classic world buffs, a big topic for a lot of players. What can we expect to be part of the TBC launch? And what features apart from raids and arena seasons will come with the later phases?
I'll try to give some examples because it's like a laundry list. I probably can't go through every single one, but in general, we would expect like the systems. So like things like the expertise you mentioned, we would expect that to be included from launch. So we're going to base our class balance and gear sets and talents on the final 2.4.3 patch, the same way we did with Classic starting from the 1.12 patch. Like we did that on purpose. There was some rumor that like we could only do 1.12 because that's the only one we had data for, and that's not true. We actually do have data from before 1.12. We chose to do that because we feel like that's the most correct and balanced version of the game. And the same thing's true here. We feel like the designers at the time were making balance adjustments once it was live, and those came out in patches back then because we didn't have as a robust hot fixing process as we do today. So by the time 2.4.3 came out, that was really what the state that the designers would have launched the game in if they could have. If they had the benefit of hindsight. And now we do have the benefit of hindsight. So we can launch with expertise and all the final 2.4.3 talents for classes at the beginning of Burning Crusade Classic. On the other hand, I'm trying to think of what the example was of something that you mentioned that we wouldn't do at launch. It might be like questing zones and things like that. Some things that would like feel like those kind of progressive content unlocks, we might delay some of those especially if they have rewards tied to them to kind of fit with the chapter that they're unlocking. And I don't have, again, a specific list of those. We know we want to break out the raids by their kind of like tier progression, the tier 4 raids, the tier 5 raids, the tier 6 raids, and finally like 6.5 and Sunwell Plateau. But all the other individual ones, we're going to have to go through those, case by case, and we'll try to give you more information about those in the future as we make those decisions.
Thanks. So no Dragon Slayer in TBC launch for the first raids. No Songflower.
Oh, right. The world buffs. Yes, of course. I think those stop working at level 63.
Okay, great. Awesome.
Do you want to simplify the complex attunement system of raids in the Burning Crusade so it's easier to get into Black Temple and not have to clear Serpentine Cavern and Mount Hyjal and the other stuff before? And actually, we feel like attunements are a big part of the Burning Crusade experience, that those attunement chains are in many cases like part of what makes it interesting. That said, when they first came out, I think their initial form was in some cases really brutal. I feel like I remember hearing like you'd clear the end boss and it would drop like one attunement for one of your raiders. And you're like, okay, well, so all of us have to raid this how many more times to get attuned? Like, this is kind of ridiculous. So we want to, I think they pretty quickly moved to a system where everybody who completed the raid or completed the boss encounter would get the attunement. We're kind of aiming for that. And that said, there also was this progressive, eventually these attunements were all removed. And we're also going to tie that to kind of the phase unlock schedule. So when a piece of content is current, like when Karazhan first comes out on launch day, you do still have to do the full attunement chain. You have to go and do all of the quests to go to Arcatraz and go to Black Morass and do the whole thing to get your key so that you can go into Karazhan. And then later we'll probably change it so that somebody has to have the key nearby to open the gate, but the actual like instance portal lets anybody in. So it's like, okay, as long as you're there and you someone's got to click the lock, you can get through the door. And then similarly, we'll relax the attunements progressively. Like, we feel like Burning Crusade wouldn't be complete if we didn't include them at all. Of course, we have to have the attunement chains. Like, there were meme-worthy of themselves back in a time before the commonality of memes today, where people would post these enormous like flow charts of like, this is what you have to do the attunement. Those are great. And so we want to make sure that people get a chance to relive that experience too, even though it is complicated and a challenge. Sometimes the challenge is what makes it fun.
With the way that you guys released Classic, it seemed like you guys had a huge emphasis on making sure that everything was released in a similar way that it was in vanilla. And I wonder how important that is for you guys going into TBC, how you guys want to try to make it feel as natural as possible, and how that plays into how quickly you guys are trying to get TBC released as well, because I know that you guys don't want to like announce a timeline or anything like that. But what sort of impact does the progression that you guys want have to do with the release dates that you guys are trying to get out and the beta releases that you guys are trying to get out?
Well, we want to be authentic, but we also, kind of have the advantage this time around in that the content is for the most part done, and we're able to see how the population is progressing, how the community is progressing. So we have a little bit of flexibility to move things forward or back, to best suit, when people are ready for the content. That being said, you had a specific question, I think, about Burning Crusade's release. And, there's a lot of complexity behind the scenes, with us moving up to, the latest server technology, and to provide you with all of our player community with choice, whether they want to move on to Burning Crusade, whether they want to stay in Classic, or if they're completely indecisive, whether they want to optionally, clone their character and essentially have a character in each world. So we're gonna make sure that we do a pretty thoughtful job of debugging everything. Go through a good beta cycle on it. You aren't going to have to wait too long, but we do want to make sure that everything's pretty solid, so that when we open up the dark portal, it'll be a great experience for you.
Hi guys, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Big Classic fan, big WoW fan. And I was really happy to see that you guys are opting for some changes in TBC. I play Alliance in Classic, so I'm very happy we're getting a Seal of Blood as well. That really helps for my guild, so we don't have to transfer to Horde altogether. But I was also wondering if you're also looking into other changes. For example, for Drums of War, the small Bloodlust item. Because it will almost be mandatory to fill your bags with the item in its current state. So are you looking into changing Drums of War as well?
Potentially. That's another one that stands out as like, we don't want players to feel like they have to literally bring 100% people with leatherworking. And so we will probably make some kind of adjustment there to make sure that there's it's still a useful item. Leatherworkers still feel valued and important, but that we don't see that everybody is literally telling their guilds that to be the best, you have to all be leatherworkers. I don't have any specific details on what we're going to do there, but we're definitely looking at it. And we think that that's another thing that probably is worth a slight adjustment.
Okay, awesome to hear that you're at least looking at it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi. This might be a bit of a weird question, but now you're going for the first expansion, but the first time that you guys decided let's do Classic, that was to cater to a specific audience who wanted the original one, right? So there must have been a phase, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you would think that you guys were going to make Classic, even if it took a long time to decide and do it. And was there any idea that we're going to do Classic and that's it, no more? Because when we start doing things like this, and then maybe the next one, you're going to bite in your own tail at the end. Do you think the enthusiasm will be just as big with this one and then the next one and the next one after that?
We had no way of anticipating how popular Classic was going to be.
Okay.
When we first announced it, it was really a love letter from us to our player community. We honestly believed that it was going to be our core players, and we were completely surprised by how large the reception was, and to this day how vibrant this community is. And we have a responsibility to keep that community entertained. Mm-hmm. So even at the announcement of Classic, we realized, given the outpouring of love that we got back from the fans, that we should undertake the work to do Burning Crusade. And as Brian said earlier, we have a lot of great content in Burning Crusade. We have a lot of time that can play out now, and we're going to watch very carefully and see how the community is receiving Burning Crusade before we make any commitments about what's next. We appreciate the sheer love that we've gotten from this community, and we're not going to let you down. We're going to keep entertaining you as long as you'll let us.
Right. And for those people who really did want to come back just because it was the original before the expansions, that's why we thought it was so important to offer that choice to let your character
era,
go to
right?
Classic era or continue to Burning Crusade, or both.
Do you find substantial differences between Classic players and regular players? And do the youngest people show interest for Classic, or the majority of players were already like WoW fans, old players?
Gosh, I feel like there is definitely like differences in like interest, but I don't know if I could generalize in terms of like differences like demographically or things like that. But I feel like people who like Classic generally have a feeling of wanting to invest a lot of time and effort into trying to get like their groups together and make those new social bonds. They generally tend to be people who are looking for like a new social group and a new experience to, you know, kind of like really sink their teeth into and spend a lot of time with, and they are willing to make those kind of long-term investments. And hopefully I'm not like speaking too broadly here, but you know, I feel like that one of the things that are really nice about modern WoW is those kind of like quick conveniences. Like I want to just jump into LFD and get a quick dungeon, and I want to make sure that that's going to fit into my lunch break, right? You know, that's a really compelling feature, but you know, it's those are trade-offs that classic is for, like, hey, I know I'm willing to put the effort in to have to maybe make a new friendship, put some time in and talk to people, and we think that's kind of interesting distinction.
Yeah, we do know that we've had a lot of people come to play Classic that had actually never played WoW before.
That too, yeah.
So you know, we thought it was going to be, you know, largely our older players, the people that were around, you know, 15 years ago, and you know, we're looking for that nostalgia experience. But we were really excited to see a lot of new players come in. We think that some of them were probably brought in by their friends who, you know, were returning to play, but there's definitely a large group of people that this is their first experience with World of Warcraft, and that's so exciting. You know, especially given that kind of the core of Classic is about community. The world is pretty tough, you know, tougher than say modern WoW standards, and so people really do need to band together to help, you know, conquer the raids that we have, even in the environments that we have. So it's a great social experience, and we're happy that for new players, this is their first experience.
Yeah, actually, in my own guild, I noticed that like there's plenty of people that are my age, and then also there are people who are younger. But like, it's easy to make that incorrect assumption. There were some people who we thought were older, and then when we were all just talking about it, like, oh wait, you're in your 20s? I'm shocked. I thought you were 40, like I am.
Hi, Brian. Hi, John.
Hi.
Release of the Classic was a big success, and it was my first game in World of Warcraft, and it was great. But I remember it was my personal pain when I wanted to play the game, but I needed to wait for a long, long time. It was so big crowds on the server. Will be the Burning Crusade be able to avoid these problems?
We're going to make an effort for sure. We do have new technology today that we didn't have back then. And so first, just that our servers are capable of handling higher populations than they were, both in terms of like their total capacity and in specific areas. But that is like an exponential problem. And so when you're in an area with a lot of other players where they're all close together to you, everything that you do has to be like sent in a message to every one of the other players, and while they're also all sending all of their actions to all of the players around them, including you. And so that problem grows exponentially in size, even though our computing power over the last 15 years has only kind of grown at a linear pace. So while we can do more than we could back then, it is still a exponential challenge that we need to keep up with. So there's a limit where you can't, like, even with faster hardware that we have today, you can't keep up with that. And so that's where we start doing things like, okay, well, we have to do layers to make sure that we can actually put some kind of separation between players to make sure that the game continues to be performant. That said, we are able to do technological improvements that do make it easier for people to play in an area, like we saw with the release of Encourage. We had like over 1,000 players in Silithus, which was more than we ever used to have back in 2004. And we were able to play the game. Like, the game didn't crash. There was certainly like evidence of latency, and that's one of the things that we do to try to solve that problem. Is we said, hey, if people really want to have this experience where like 1,000 of us all get together in one zone and have this kind of shared experience where like you're just blown away by, oh my God, I can't believe there's this many people here. Like, what can we do to make that experience perform the way people expect it to? And so we looked at like, okay, we know we're going to get this hardware limit where, you know, there's going to be some degradation. What can we do to control that? And so what we did was we started controlling the kinds of things that we would tell the server not to do to make it mimic what it would be not able to keep up with anyway. And so some of those are like, you see people when there's a really crowded area start to kind of pop around because of the way that the client will say, like, I started from here and I'm moving in this direction starting at this time, and only have to send facing update changes to catch any like turns. And if it's delayed on getting those and distributing them to everybody, you see people like, as they start to run in one direction, suddenly pop over to here when the server realizes what's happened. And although like you see that behavior, we said, hey, what if we didn't send the facing updates as often, send fewer of those, only send like heartbeat updates like back that off, it has the same effect to players, but the servers keep up. So basically the servers stop doing the thing that they wouldn't have been able to keep up with doing anyway, and once you start reaching a certain population. So of course, when people spread out across more of the world, then it's very quick and responsive, and you see everything behaving correctly. And when you have like, oh my God, there's so many people, I couldn't keep up with them anyway. Okay, maybe they might pop a little bit. That would have happened regardless, and we just make that something that the servers can keep up with. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you so much. It sounds magnificent. I wish you great success. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you for the time you're taking to give us the answers to these questions. So my question is, we know new players can opt to get the boost from the 58 character, but what happened with new players that doesn't want to go to that option and want to start from zero, from scratches? Which experience will they receive, the classic experience or the Burning Legion experience? And how long would it take us, these new players, to be in the same rate as the other ones, as the friends? So how long would it take? Will we have a small boost as we had in the original TBC in the pre-patch to level up faster, or we get the same experience for leveling from the classic?
The intention is to do the like later systems, and actually like the XP like leveling rate was adjusted, I think, and I think it was patch 2.2 or maybe 2.3. And so we are going to include the faster leveling rate in the Burning Crusade expansion. But I want to point out that, of course, there are different realms. So if you want to level in the original classic experience, you can still start a new level 1 on a classic era realm. But of course, if you start a new level 1 on a Burning Crusade realm, then it'll be the Burning Crusade experience with the Burning Crusade experience curve. Did you ever think about making the content more challenging for more experienced players while working on TBC or vanilla, or you just assume that some people are going to clear hard content faster due to the experience? It's a little of both. We certainly do expect that players with the benefit of their modern knowledge and experience are able to clear things faster. And so we don't want to make adjustments just for the fact that like you're better at the game than you used to be. Like, that's great. Like, then you can experience the game and find new tricks and new experiences that you can do. You can show off to your friends like, hey, this game, I know this game. I played this game 15 years ago. I know all these tricks. I know these raid encounters. I know how to like stack my stats and like customize my character for optimal performance. And it's great to have that. Especially as we have all these new players coming in who are experiencing it for the first time. Like, that's another thing that sparks those conversations. Like, oh my God, how are you doing these amazing things? Like, you get that conversation like, oh, let me teach you. Let me show you what I know about this game. And that said, it is a temptation, of course, when we see, we launch a new raid and it's, of course, an old raid coming back again. And so players smash it the first day and they run through it in half an hour. There's like a tinge of like, oh, it would be nice if it lasted a little longer, but also like an excitement, like, wow, it's really cool that people remember how to do this so well and are practiced in their performance that they can really like band together and crush this stuff. So there's a temptation, but really we go back to we want this to be an authentic experience. We want it to be what people remember. That said, in that same vein, there were a lot of nerfs over the course of Burning Crusade, especially. That was a expansion where a lot of content came out in a really hard form. And then like originally, like this was kind of that original sense of like people were getting harder and harder tiers, and that like progression of difficulty continued into Burning Crusade. And so the initial releases of many of these raid encounters were tuned harder than they eventually were. And then they would reduce the difficulty over time to let people progress through them easier. And we want to give people that pre-nerf ability to like try things out. I think we covered it in the deep dive panel, like someone already mentioned, how Muru is a good example of something where we have a mechanic that we wouldn't include the pre-nerf version of because it excluded players. It's a spell pushback mechanic. But the health nerf, we would want to give you the pre-nerf state so that you can try it and see if you can do it with a higher health pool.
I've got a question which is probably too far away from the release, but do you consider to actually remove the dungeon cap at launch? Because lots of people are planning to level through the dungeons, and like having 30 dungeons per day is not too much, I would say.
Are you talking about the instance limit that we have right now?
Yes.
The 30 instances per day.
Which was largely put in place in Classic in response to exploits that were taking place, and people just running over and over and farming. Brian can give you more details, but we obviously have more dungeons for you to go through now, so that may not be as big an issue. That is definitely something we're going to keep an eye on, and if it makes sense, we can lower that cap. but we just want to make sure it's a good experience and a fair experience for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. It was really a response to, as there was a lot of automation and stuff like that. We have lots of efforts that we do to counter automation, and one of the things that we wanted to do there was just make sure there was an upper bound on how much like botters could do damage to the economy before they were caught. And so we would catch them, but of course, if you catch them in 24 hours, and in that 24 hours they've run 60 instances, we could be like, what if we capped them at 30, and then by the time we catch them, they've only done half as much damage. And so that's the kind of thing that we put that in place for. And certainly it is something that we're talking about, whether it still makes sense, the same limit or a different limit for Burning Crusade. Probably we'll want to have some limit. Maybe 30 doesn't make sense anymore. 30, honestly, 30 in a day still seems like a pretty high number to me. I don't know if I've ever gotten through 30 in a day. Usually when we see that from legitimate players, it was like, oh, I'm trying to farm this one specific drop. And so like we saw people trying to get their Savage Gladiator chain from Blackrock Depths when it was dropping off of the arena. And so they would run the arena over and over and over again. And it's like right there near the entrance. So you run it, you reset it, run it, reset it. And yeah, you could hit 30 in a day pretty easily. The Burning Crusade dungeons are shorter overall, but I think probably a little bit less targeted on that kind of behavior, but we'll see. We'll take a look at it. We know they're shorter overall. We know there's so much content in dungeons that maybe we should relax it. And it's definitely something we're talking about and thinking about.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Guys, I have a bit of a harsh question. It's about botting issues and the current economy state of WoW Classic, because it's obvious there's a huge botting issue. Huge groups of going 4 rogues, 1 priest, and just botting their way to level 60. Also, guys farming through bugs in ZG, and it's basically destroying the economy. People have massive amounts of gold, and going into TBC, this might become an issue. People going into the new expansion with the gold cap, I think it might ruin some stuff. It's also very expensive to raid at the moment. I hear a lot of people even buying gold because they can't keep up by just farming. Are you guys looking into tackling this problem that the economy is so, that people have so much gold at the moment going into TBC? And also, are you going to address the botters anytime soon?
We've been really aggressive on the botting side. We don't. You'll see ban waves, and we may talk about it. Usually what happens is you'll hear the community itself respond. The irony is that when we ban someone that's botting, they don't get out and say, oh my gosh, I was botting and I got banned and this is so unjust. They just get very quiet and they disappear. But we're actively working on this. Our risk team is watching every day. We do rely on the reports from community. That's the best way for us to know, because the botters are sophisticated. I mean, when they know that we're looking at a particular vector, they'll change their tactics. And then it's usually the community that'll tip us off that something is altered, and then we can go after that. But we take it extremely seriously. We want you to have a great experience. We don't think it's cool to be playing with robots. So that will continue on. And I want to say, talk about the economy, Brian.
I do. And also on the botting issue, it is not even just the ban waves. Some people have said oh, you shouldn't do this in waves. We don't do it just in waves. Just those are sometimes the ones that we feel are important to talk about because they're so big, but we literally are banning thousands of bots all the time. Every week there are thousands of bots being banned that we don't talk about. So it is a huge problem. We totally agree. And it's something we absolutely are spending a lot of resources on. In terms of the effect on the economy, that's like we said about the 30 instance limit. That's one of the reasons we put that in there, is because they're so sophisticated and trying so hard that we want to make sure we can limit the impact they have when we can't catch them yet. That said, we are always on the lookout. And as John said, the community reports are really helpful. In terms of the effect on the economy and making raiding expensive, I agree with you, that can be a challenge. And at the same time, you can also try to farm for your own materials. I know that that's also a challenge because sometimes the botters go after the materials. And it's a matter of trying to find a balance between what would we have to do in terms of is there a adjustment we might make to spawn rates to make it so that you could keep up, or if we can try to make sure that there's a place where you can get it out of an instance. Those are the things we look at. And so we generally feel like it hasn't gotten too bad yet, except for in cases like Black Lotus, where we actually did make a change because we know with there being a guarantee of 1 per zone and only 10 specific spawn locations in that zone. And at that time, there were there were bots that were parked invisibly at each one of those 10 locations, and they knew how often it would respawn, and they would check them before you could. It was like, okay, well, you can't win that fight. So we lowered the respawn rate. We put it in more locations, but we still kept the one per zone. So it had that same flavor, but still would let it be a little bit more accessible. And I've heard, like, it still feels rare, but I've had a number of herbalists who I play with reach out to me after we made that change and say like, oh, this is great. I just found a Black Lotus. I'm so excited. Right. And like prior to that, they had never seen one. And it was because they were always perfectly camped. So we do have the idea to make targeted changes. In terms of like whether we would do anything significant to the economy, we do want to make sure that anybody who, like, in terms of like, some people suggested, take away people's gold, and we definitely would not want to take away people's gold. For people who earned it legitimately, like, you put that effort in, right? Maybe you did some of these farming mechanics legitimately without an automation client, and that's okay, right? Like, part of the fun of this was, hey, let's remember this experience, and like the fact that a mage could solo pull Maradon, like, oh my gosh, we're not going to let a bot do that, and we're going to try to catch those guys. But if you could like pull off doing that yourself, that's a cool trick. Like, that's something we want to kind of celebrate. There's people doing solo farms of Dire Maul with their hunters. I've learned how to do that too. It's really fun. It's exciting. And now people are like selling cleared instances to get the world buffs. So it's really cool to see kind of these meta improvements and changes that people make in response to that. And we don't want to take that away, even though we do want to respect the fact that we want them to be done by legitimate players and not by bots.
Thanks so much, Brian and John.
Yeah, no problem.
So this one is not an in-game experience. It's actually something that when I heard you speaking about 750,000 code lines, it pops out. Is there like a memorable issue or challenge that your team has faced back in the past in 2007 or at the last TBC that you were able to solve in a way that you could describe to us, like a technical, gameplay, graphical, something that would actually challenge your team solving from 2007 to TBC release right now?
Hunters are the problem. No, in all seriousness.
I'm a hunter, so don't
I
get
am
there.
too. I'm playing a hunter. I actually rolled a hunter in Classic because I know that they're a source of so many problems because of their unique mechanics. So I love hunters. But we do kind of sometimes joke about like, oh my gosh, this game would be so much easier to develop if there weren't hunters in the game. They have these kind of unique things. Like especially in Classic, and this goes away in Burning Crusade, is that dead zone, that area where like you can't melee, you can't shoot them with your ranged attacks, and you're just stuck, right? It's one of like the classic hunter frustrations. That's a unique kind of mechanic for hunters. Most spells don't have a minimum range. Feign Death is pretty unique, and Feign Death certainly caused us plenty of problems. Feign Death by itself has been a recurring issue, as I'm sure all hunter players in Classic know. There have been numerous changes to that, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to play hunter this time around, was to make sure that we had like eyes on that and see what the effect was and pay attention to whether or not we were getting it right. And obviously, like, the most recent thing that we're changing about that is we've realized that, we kind of knew this all along. Part of the reason why some of the responsiveness people were complaining about with Feign Death in certain circumstances was a result of spell batching. It's a delay in the messages that go between the servers, including between the client and the server, that will like batch up those messages about, so they are processed every half a second. And that can cause, various effects, like, did you drop combat? And did these guys lose their aggro, which are actually different actions, to maybe not be timed right. And it's really hard to get those timing interactions correct, especially when there's a delay.
Oh, great. Thanks.